Hello and welcome to the Implementing Racial Equity in County Health web forum. My name is Shireen Malik-Kavzali. My pronouns are she and hers. I manage the Health Policy and Planning Program with the Public Health Policy and Planning Division of County Health. I'm really excited to be here to talk about advancing racial equity in county health. I'm a Middle Eastern immigrant to the United States and passionate about advancing racial equity so we can all benefit and be a true community. It's so great to have so many colleagues and key partners take time from their busy schedules to join a forum on racial equity. This effort was shepherded by the Public Health Policy and Planning Division led by Cassius Lockett, the Government Alliance for Racial Equity cross-divisional team led by Maria Laurenti Foresti, and the Health Policy and Planning Program. Lots of people have jumped in to be supportive. Believe it or not, we have about 22 facilitators for this session and probably about 10 folks in the background. We had intended this meeting to be in person. We've been planning it pre-COVID, but when the COVID hit, we just had to delay and reroute to Zoom for this platform instead of room 100. But the bright side is that I think we can accommodate more people, and the downside though is that the technology can be glitchy. We're still helping people make sure they can get into the link, can hear okay, and we're still learning it. So be patient with us, please. The bad part too is that we can't interact personally in the same way, but if you do experience any tech issues, please chat them into the chat box on your right. Specifically to my colleague Sharon Kalaunan is standing by to help troubleshoot with you, so you're not alone in this. We are recording this session to share with those who were unable to be with us today. If you're not interested in being recorded, please turn off your video and your chat any questions in that you want via the chat box. We'll make the recording available for all the participants and send it out through all county health staff as follow-up. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on Ohlone land. The Ohlone include a number of Native groups that lived in this Northwest region that spoke a similar language. It's important for us to understand the longstanding history that has brought all of us to the land in San Mateo County as part of seeking to understand our place within history and also to honor the tribes and the descendants of those tribes. We got some Zoom housekeeping to do. This event is being recorded, as I mentioned. All participants are muted. We have about 360 folks that registered for this event, so we need to make sure that the background noise is kept to a minimum. We'll do polls throughout. We have 4 polls to get your pulse on how you're feeling and your sentiments. They're all anonymous and the results will be shared immediately. To be unmuted during the Q&A, you'll have to use the raise hand function, which you can see through what you can access through the link on the participant link, and you can raise your hand, and then you can also lower your hand once you're complete. You can also use the thumbs up button on your phone. You can also *6 to unmute for phone only. That's for people who are dialing in by phone. Try to keep your questions brief because we're trying to get through a lot today. You can also chat your questions into the chat box. There'll be specific times held for those joining by phone to ask questions. We are all taking feedback via survey following this forum, so you'll have a chance to add additional feedback there. All presentations, slides, and resources will be sent out. One thing I want us to all do at this moment is to rename ourselves. Many of you are coming in using links that others may have sent you. So I'd like you to rename yourself using 1, the correct name, and 2, adding in your preferred pronouns. You do that by looking at the square that you're in. There's 3 dots on the very top right. You right click on that, and 3rd option down is to rename. Once you do that, you can put in parentheses your preferred pronouns, as you see in mine that say she, her. You can also correct your name if it's not correct. We're also using closed captioning for those that need the service. Please make sure that you privately chat with Rosa Torpis, which you can find her in the recipient under the drop down in the chat box, so that she can make sure she's aware that you need closed captioning to move you to the correct breakout groups once we go into the breakout groups. All right, I think that's it. So I wanted to share with you the dream team. You are looking at me right now, but what you're not seeing is all of these great people: Sharon, Daryl, Cassius, Erica, Rosa, Wanda, Katie, who really from inception to just moments ago to right now, who are panicking in the background trying to let people in, have been working incredibly hard to figure this out for us. So I want a huge shout out to all of you. The agenda for today, we're gonna go through some more housekeeping, then hear a welcome from Luis Rogers, the chief of our county health. We'll hear presentations from Sarija Srinivasan, deputy chief, and Jay Africa, director of behavioral health and recovery in Marin County and former director of the Office of Diversity and Equity here in our own BHRS. They'll share efforts to address racial equity, some lessons learned. We'll have a Q&A segment where you could raise your hand or chat in questions. We'll have about 10 minutes there. We'll take a pause and then get into Zoom breakouts for discussion on the strengths and areas of growth for us to advance racial equity as a collective. We've attempted to put you in rooms with your organizations based on what we knew from your email. And each of the there's facilitators in each of the groups, and they'll lead you through the conversation. Huge shout out to the facilitators. Believe it or not, we had to find 22 facilitators, many of which jumped in last minute to help us with this. As the registration kept going up, we were recruiting endlessly. Then we'll come back together after the small group discussions into a large group, hear from a few people, some of the most salient issues that were elevated from the small groups. I want to pause and just make sure that you know that we won't be able to get through every single small group and hear a report back, but we will do a popcorn style, and we'll ask you also to share via chat. Then we'll have Maria Loretta Foresti, current director of Office of Diversity and Equity in BHRS, who'll come to introduce Cindy Donis, who will be doing a wellness activity for us, given that these discussions and conversations around racial equity can raise a lot of trauma and deep emotion and experiences for all of us, and we wanted to acknowledge that. She'll close us out, and we will then follow up with all the, and we'll follow up with the different present recordings and poll or survey that we promised we'd do. All right, so now I wanted to just take a minute to do a couple of polls with you. So this is going to might be a new feature for some of you. One, this is just to say, hey, how are you feeling today? But we call it a CAT scale. A CAT scale, a scale of 1 to 9. Which of these CATs describes best how you're feeling? And you can interpret whatever you want from those pictures. Rosa, if you could launch the poll now. You'll see the poll has come up, and you click on the poll, and I see it moving right now. We've got about almost 50% of people voted. So let's keep those coming in. Let's see which cat wins. Okay, it's starting to look like we're somewhere between a 6 and a 3. Okay. Are you all seeing the scribble scrabble that's coming up on my slide? Huh.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure why that's happening. Maybe my kids are in the background controlling, trying to prank me somehow. That's never happened before. Okay, so we have the winners here are 6 and a 3. So let's see. 6 looks curious and awake, and 3 looks a little tortured, maybe. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for doing this. So you can see where we're at with the polling. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll now. And share the results. Now, do you see the results in front? Okay, great. So you can see number 6 is the winner, kind of, interested, then followed by, potentially tortured. So let's keep it moving and see if we can do better than that. Okay. So here we have another poll, and this is our pre-survey awareness and interest poll. So we kind of want to get a gauge from you on what your level of awareness of racial equity work is in the county and your level of interest and engagement. Can we launch the second poll, please, Rosa? Okay. Please fill this out as quickly as possible so we can end the poll and show you the results and keep the conversation going. As I see the results coming in, it looks like people are somewhere between a little knowledge and some knowledge, with some knowledge looking like it's winning out. All right, I'm going to give it just one more second. All right, I'm going to share the results here. It looks like some knowledge first, a little bit knowledge next. Then for engagement and interest, we have overwhelmingly a lot of interest or engagement on advancing racial equity. That's great. You probably self-selected for this also. All right. So I wanted to share a little bit of framing for us before we hear from, before we go into ground rules and hear from Louise. This is really for what I believe to be true as we think about the context that we're stepping into these conversations. One is that racism is real. It's embedded into personal interactions, institutions. It's across our systems and reinforced in subtle and overt ways. And we're all affected by it. This is not just that people of color are affected, but all of us are impacted by this system of power structures. We need to act with urgency. There is no better time than now. We need to think about how we have conversations around racial equity because they're difficult. They can be uncomfortable and bring up deep emotions. We need to be thoughtful and authentic and honest in how we share and how we discuss with one another. And we need to take care of ourselves as well. This will be imperfect, far from perfect. We are really prioritizing progress over perfection to make sure that we can start this conversation. So know that we will make mistakes. We will make mistakes and we will attempt to learn from them. And any feedback you have is very welcome. We're all partners in this work and need to be able to do this together. Finally, we want to get into some group agreements borrowed from the BHRS Office of Health, Diversity and Equity's Cultural Humility Program. These may be ones that you've seen before. They're often used. Try to practice listening as if the speaker is wise, listening to understand, practicing I statements, being okay to respectfully disagree, take risks. There's no pressure to speak, but everyone's voice is welcomed. Be disciplined about not making assumptions, no blaming or shaming. Confidentiality, if stories are shared, is important. What's learned here leaves here, but what's shared here stays here. Courage to interrupt if something's going wrong and going amiss. Pay attention to what moves you. When we say use oops and outs, it just means it's okay. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it. If it hurts, acknowledge that too and share it. We're all human and we hurt and we're fallible. Now with those ground rules, I'd like to turn us to Louise Rogers, the chief of our health system, to really welcome us and share why we're here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to see so many of you here. And I believe, judging from my own experience, there may be some even more people trying to get in as I speak, but it just really speaks to, in addition to the poll that you all just completed, how important everybody really feels this topic is of implementing equity in San Mateo County Health. And I'm also really happy that Srija Srinivasan, our deputy chief, and Cassius Lockett, our public health director, have been freed, as well as some of you who I know are regulars in the public health pandemic response, to take a few hours away and really take a step back and help us think collectively. And also, Jay, I'm just so pleased, so pleased to be welcoming you home, from Marin County. So for those of you who don't know, many of you do, but Jay Africa is one of our panelists who was just a few years ago a manager here in County Health and Behavioral Health. And he was the creator of our Office of Diversity and Equity, ODE, in 2009, and the architect of our health equity initiatives, which have been anchored in BHRS now for many years. And so Jay, as I was reflecting about the significance of your presence here at this time, it really reminds me of all of the reasons that we have to be very hopeful. So your legacy here is both a personal one of the example of your courage to face hatred and share who you are every day. But it's also a testament to our collective capacity to learn and unite around a common purpose and change our thinking and our practice of acceptance in this organization in health, which is really what we're focused on today, is our broad community of health, not just county health, but all of our stakeholders and partners, including our clients and patients. And for me personally, your presence here is a reminder for me that the work is always personal. One person's experience impacting another's. And as I learned and was changed fundamentally by your willingness to share the reality of your experience with me and building on the trust of our relationship. And the work is also collective. When we take our individual experiences and we work together to build more of the systems and the kind of organizational architecture that is necessary to support equity, cultural humility, and inclusion. So I want to make a special thanks to you for joining us at this moment. I'm also reminded that we've been on the journey of fighting inequality and promoting understanding for a long time, because we know that racism and inequality are public health issues, and we have advocated for change on many levels. And we know that we can't achieve health equity if we don't actually achieve racial equity. And that makes advancing racial equity core to our mission and core to our work in county health. And several years ago, we formally joined something called GARE, the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, the Bay Area Learning Cohort. And that elevated our capacity and our infrastructure to expand our commitment to equity and to arm us more effectively with the expertise of a network, not just a national network, but peer organizations in the Bay Area that we can learn from, and bring together the knowledge, expertise, and experiences of many divisions across health to advance our work together. And now the county has joined GARE with an even broader group of county representatives. And the focus of that is to learn from the GARE experience. And under the leadership of our current board president, Marin Slocum, equity is taking shape as a countywide priority. I think we all sense that this moment in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and others, as well as the pandemic, has really exposed the depths of injustice that Black and brown people have lived with daily, inequality and racism built into the structures and systems of our society and of this organization. And the pandemic has really exacerbated and magnified that underlying inequality. And this raw moment of a heightened call to action is building to an opportunity. And the question is, what will we make of that opportunity here in local health? What can we do to drive this moment to be different than the many other moments that have preceded it? Because the problems that have been exposed are deep and long-standing. So I'd like to see us launch ourselves rather than tiptoe into a future that clearly establishes this organization, the broad organization of all of us, not just County Health, but all of the partners, as one that prioritizes equity, inclusion, cultural humility, and that empowers staff, partners, community members, clients, and patients to share their full lived experience so that we can bring our best selves forward to help our residents live longer and better lives. And that enhances our effectiveness as an agent of change for a more just and equal society. There's a long way to go, and the journey is both a collective and a personal one. And it's true that my white sphere of experience is not punctuated daily by racism. And for me, the call to action is also a call to listening more carefully, listening to colleagues that have spoken about their experiences, about driving home in fear they would be pulled over because of their Black or brown skin, listening to my neighbor whose 19-year-old Black son was recently knocked off his bicycle by a white police who intentionally opened his car door in his path, really to hurt him. And when he and his mother and I talked about taking it up with our police chief, who is a Black man, we agreed we could not because they know where we live. And I was very slow to see that privilege does not protect everyone. This is something that I take for granted. We're listening to the words of 16-year-old brown, Black, Latina poet Ziamora Larkin, who said, "It starts with facing your fears. It starts fighting the inner me, the enemy we can't see. It is called fear, the fear I feel." In the last weeks, some of our staff have shared stories of their own experience of living decades with daily racism and fear. And in an organization that values treating everyone with dignity and respect and speaks to the value of lived experience, where who you are, including your race and culture, should be an asset to our work. I've learned that we do not always treat everyone with dignity and respect, that we misunderstand and offend each other. I've learned that not everyone feels welcomed and comfortable being who they are in this organization. They feel marginalized and bring a different person to work in order to survive in the dominant culture. As a white woman, I know that my privilege obstructs my ability to see the best path forward. But I can play a role in helping to create the space for conversation and listen carefully. I can welcome your ideas about how to build trust, and I invite you all to call me out when you see my actions and words contributing or ignoring systemic inequalities. The pandemic has reconfirmed that this county's residents need us to be the best version of San Mateo County Health that we can possibly be. Let's try to envision ourselves personally carrying out a new framework for anti-racism within our work together. Let's ask ourselves what we can each do every day, whether we are county staff, partners, advisors, or members of our community. We each have to find our voice and contribution. We have to be the change we want to see. That's why we're enlisting your support and expertise. We know our county health efforts have strengths. Much of those strengths lie in each of your contributions. And we have areas of challenge and needs for growth that we invite your thoughts about. We need to be an organization that can harness the power of each individual and each partner's full capacity and power to carry out the work that our community needs to live longer and better lives. let's have that conversation about what that would take. Start here. I'm looking forward to learning alongside you today and learning from you how we can all be all together better. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. That was wonderful. I appreciate you modeling for us really what it means to speak from the heart in this work, and also your call to not tiptoe into the future, to really launch us. And I take that as, and I think we all should, as a directive to figure out how we do that best. So thank you. Now I'm going to turn over to another amazing champion in this work, Sarija Srinivasan. She's the deputy chief of our health system. And she's also actually the Government Alliance for Racial Equity that Louise mentioned. She's our liaison to the Health Executive Committee. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarija. And Sarija, you may be muted because we cannot hear you yet.
I'll run over there and see if she needs.
Okay. Thanks for being on tech support, Louise. Let's give her a moment and see if we can have her on. If not, I think, Jay, I'll ask you in the next minute or so if it's still.
Shireen,
yeah.
somebody needs to unmute her.
Oh, Rosa, can you please unmute Sarija?
The host has to allow, I think, maybe the slides too.
I've got the slide. This is her slide up. I've got her slides ready to go. It sounds like maybe she just needs to be unmuted.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry. We should never mute the deputy chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be with so many of you. And for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Sarija Srinivasan, and I'm just really, really grateful for this opportunity and this time you're each taking to give to this work at such an important time. I was a little bit bummed when I got Erica's email inviting me for this dialogue and confirming my registration, that it said, you will get to hear Sarija Srinivasan. I'm like, oh, shoot, I was kind of hoping for someone better. But I just really cannot take for granted how grateful I am that in this really challenging time, that there are 243 of you that are prioritizing being together and wanting to learn and wanting to share. So I just really deeply appreciate that. And I feel lucky every day to do this work alongside you. So if Shireen can advance my slide, I'll tell you what my section is about. So in this 15 minutes, I'm hoping I can help us unify our understanding of why San Mateo County Health is engaged in this work on racial equity, which Louise really framed quite well. So I might be able to buy ourselves a little time there, as well as what we are working on. I saw in the polling that, you know, there's a mix of us in terms of how much you know about what County Health is working on. So hope to bring us up to date on a little bit of that. I really hope in this session we can learn from each other. It is just so essential not only to the collective knowledge, but also the collective resolve. I know I miss seeing you all at work. I know I miss seeing you in the hallways and in the ways that we typically get to just be a sounding board for each other in quick bites and bits. And so I'm really appreciative of what Shireen and Erica and Katie, whose assignment ended, and Daryl and Maria did to organize this session for us to learn together. And then for each of the facilitators to help us harness that learning in a way that we can build on at a really important time in the work. And then I just want to make sure you all know, whether you're part of our county health team or a critical partner who chose to make time today, or an advisory board member or one of our elected officials, that what you help us learn will help us really operationalize and organize in what we do next. We're really humble about where we are. You know, we are trying to learn from every signal and every amount of wisdom, but we also are really intentional about wanting to make progress. And one of my motivations, you know, just in doing the work is that we can't let moments like this and movements like this pass our residents by. If we have so many amends to make and opportunities to do better by people who are really counting on us. And I'm really, just really resolved about how much of that we can do together. So next, Shireen. So let me just say in brief terms, and Louise gave us a good framework for this, of why San Mateo County Health is prioritizing work on racial equity. And three big reasons. And first is that we have a history that we cannot afford to ignore. And that history as public servants, as those of us who work in government or those of you who are working alongside of those in government, is built on policies that excluded people on the basis of their race. When I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, the history lesson I got was one of manifest destiny and a frame of colonialism and taking land in a way that I really didn't understand as a fourth grader or fifth grader. And it wasn't until much later that I understood how the land that Kansas had was taken from our Native American forebears. And it wasn't later until I really understood the brutality of slavery. I mean, the version I got in history as a kid growing up in a great public school was not the one that I know today. And we in America have great ideals. And I still get a little bit emotional about the Declaration of Independence and the key eloquence that, you know, our forefathers laid out. But when we've juxtaposed that with what we've imposed on people on the basis of their race and on people on the basis of other characteristics to preserve power for some and not share power with all, that's a history that we just cannot ignore. And that's a history as government that we have to overcome, and undergirds why racial equity is such an important one. The second reason I would say, in addition to our history, is that we know as public health professionals that race really matters for all the things that matter for having a great life. Our health, our happiness, our hopefulness, our ability to get what we need to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe, and our ability to earn a living. All of that is different depending on what our race is. And as an Asian American, an Indian American, my results are shared with Asian Americans of many different backgrounds, and we don't separate enough. What's different for a Pacific Islander resident in our community than an Indian American in our community? But in every single important metric, race is a defining characteristic of what happens as a result. And I hope some of you may have had the chance to watch Dr. Williams' pre-work assignment. I was really re-inspired by that. And he's a great teacher to all of us as to how profoundly race matters. A third reason is that the way that we understand race is not maybe what we have been socialized to think about race being. And race as a social construct that's designed to keep power for some and not share power with all is something I've frankly only come to better understand through this work on racial equity within county health. It's not something I was taught. It's not something that's made easy to unpack. So for any of you who are learning about some of these things anew in the horrors of the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and every brown or black life that was lost too early, this isn't something that is easy to understand in our culture. and it's something that we have to work at to understand together. And so I think that's why Louise and I and our colleagues on the executive team, are really committed to grounding that understanding for our workforce in county health. The fourth reason, and why I really truly believe that there is no way we can succeed in our mission of everyone having longer and better lives without addressing racial equity, is that we know that getting to the results that our residents, our clients deserve, requires us to be a place where everyone is respected and honored for what we bring. And so it's not because it's because we need to do this work. This work is what we're required to do, and we cannot be good at our work without doing this work on racial equity. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a bit about the history version I got as a Kansas public school student. I'll give a few facts of what I've learned about our history here in San Mateo County. San Mateo County was formed in 1856. We were one of the first 18 original counties in California. So we are, a part of the history of California. What I could gather is that county health and the precursor names that we've had was in 1876 when some land was donated to create what was called the San Mateo County Relief Home as a place that would care for people who are sick or in need. And it was interesting to me to learn that history because it is a history of charity, and it's a history of some taking care of others that was part of our DNA. And I think we don't want to lose sight of that as we also align that with a call for social justice and what we should expect for everyone and what we should strive to have in our laws and policies. We in San Mateo County have not escaped structural racism, and we've been a part of structural racism. The middle image is about the Tanforan racetrack, which in 1942 was a site that our Japanese American residents were interned, 8,000 of our residents, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and our country had a policy to put into an encampment Japanese American residents in a brutal way that made them lose a lot of what they had before we understood the wrongs of that action. And then even not too much in the recent past, what we see today in our neighborhoods and what we see about how integrated or segregated we are reflects governmental policies about real estate and how loans for buying real estate were allocated. This Bayshore map is from part of what we know of the history of Daly City, and Bayshore's incorporation into Daly City was preceded by covenants that restricted who could live in the western part of Daly City in order to qualify for government-backed loans, leaving Bayshore as one of the few areas that people of color could purchase housing without having a white person purchase a house on someone's behalf. And that's not too long ago. I mean, that's in the last 40 years that we're still overcoming that legacy and what that meant for accumulating wealth for residents in these communities. Many, many, many of you, I looked at the roster and have helped us learn and overcome these histories, have helped us understand what it means for our clients, have helped us understand what it means to be our full selves in what we do to bring to our residents. And as Louise pointed to, this is a hopeful time for what we understand as a county, to have our president of Board of Supervisors and our county manager really call out what we can build together and what we must overcome, I think gives us a lot of hope and inspiration. Next slide, Shireen. So the history we've had and why we are at this and the importance of racial equity, I just want to spend a couple minutes saying that that history of race that's socially constructed requires us to eliminate racism as a public health priority. And as Dr. Williams, I'm plugging his talk again, that 20-minute TED Talk, you can, there are many aspects of health and well-being that work together: income, education, wealth, race. But we could strip those apart and still see the harm of racism. The toxic stress that is worn by people of color for having to prove who we are, what we deserve, what we're entitled to, wears on ourselves in a way that shortens our lives. And that's life shortening that cannot get made up. And that's the toll of racism. Discrimination shortens our lives. And that hurts all of us. That removes, critical capacity and humanity from all of us. So I'll spend the next slide just unpacking the first two of these, life expectancy and low birth weight, which Louise often presents to the Board of Supervisors, as we say how we are doing on our mission of longer and better lives. And we do pretty well in lots of ways, and we have done better over time we enjoy a long length of life, 83 years. But that life expectancy is not shared equally. So this gap that today in 2020, an African-American resident of our county could expect a 6 to 7 year lower life than others is just not tolerable. And it's a gap we have to keep working on. And I'm inspired by the ways we do work on it. One of the key metrics is low birth weight. And this, I'm kind of a data person. This graph is looking at what the gap was in 2013, where low birth weight rates were more than double for Black babies than white babies. Over persistence and stamina and intention in really honoring what we know from our residents, and huge investments of expertise by Black Infant Health and Pre to 3 and infant child psychotherapy and great prenatal care by the San Mateo Medical Center. We've reduced that gap. The gap's not gone yet, but the gap in 2018 is smaller than the gap in 2013. And gives me great hope about what we can continue to do to eliminate racial gaps in the critical outcomes we strive for. Next slide, please. Okay, now I have to just log back in. Why? Louise and Shireen talked about what we see our COVID pandemic bringing to the fore, really revealing inequities and being at the risk of exacerbating them. I'm going to take a second to log back into my screen. Today's public health dashboard, tells you and tells the public that we've had 4,254 residents who have become COVID positive, in just a very short amount of time. And families have mourned the deaths of 114 people from this disease that just appeared this year. In these early months, we see that the burden of COVID-19 is not borne equally. And it's distressing to see the overconcentration of the disease among our Latinx population and tie that to risks and exposures that our Latinx population was already facing before COVID. That our public health team is learning through our case and contact investigation staff that those who live in crowded housing have more exposure because of the people who are in and out of our homes, and our Latinx population is more likely to not have the housing conditions that keep them safe. And that those doing the essential work that keeps us all healthy, whether it's food or transit or healthcare or personal care, are more proportionately Latinx residents who are keeping us healthy. There's a glimmer that for now, the fatality burdens that have been borne more significantly by Black and Brown people is not something we see as of yet in San Mateo County. Maybe, as Cassius asked, we can learn about the protective factors, that are helping to buffer the impacts of this disease. But I want you all to know that the equity lens is absolutely central to the ways we are aiming to combat COVID-19. From our approach to case and contact investigation, to where we prioritize testing, to the congregate facilities that have more people of color working in them and relying on them to stay safe. We have an equity lens that's driving how we approach this hugely unprecedented challenge. Next slide. So with that backdrop, and with knowing that why we prioritize our work in on racial equity is about what we're all about in longer and better lives for our residents and clients, I also want to say why we in County Health are prioritizing internal work at this juncture as well. One of our lessons from doing this work over many years and learning from many people is, as we've seen so glaringly, these inequities that we have to keep vigilant and resolved in addressing, our pace and our effectiveness is diminished when we don't also invest in how we treat each other and the structures and systems we have operating within our own organization. And just as Louise was remarking on the stories she's heard recently, I've also been struck by, we're learning more about colleagues in our workforce who have a family member who's COVID positive and what that's requiring of them as they, safely quarantine for 14 days. And we know what it means to show up to work and do this work that demands a lot of us. How can we make progress on what our clients need if we don't have the safety and the trust to be able to address what's fundamental to keeping us going? In learning from other jurisdictions, this includes safety and trust to talk about race. This includes safety and trust to talk about feeling dissed or dismissed or disrespected. And in the theory of change and working on this internal stuff, it's that normalizing this dialogue, practicing this dialogue, using the Shireen mantra of progress over perfect, that normalizing is just essential in order to understand what we don't know, to understand the blind spots that we have so that we can organize ourselves to operationalize what's necessary. Next slide, Shireen. So many of you who are part of our workforce have been teaching us a lot from things we've asked of you to help us ground our understanding of where we are today. And there is so much wisdom that is across our workforce and with our partners and with our trusted advisors. Most people in our organization feel comfortable and have confidence in working with the diverse community that is us, that is San Mateo County and that is San Mateo County Health. But we also see variability. We have lots of subcultures and we have lots of differences that we think we can learn from the best to keep bringing us all better. We also are more diverse at the parts of our organization that are closest to our clients than we are at the top. And that's something we have to keep working on. We can't have a top that looks really different from our clients and expect those that are not at the top to carry the water for the rest of us. And we also had almost 1 in 10 of us that didn't want to share what is our race or ethnicity in answering these surveys. And that's a signal that, things don't feel entirely comfortable for 1 in 10 of us. Next slide, please. Our workforce is more diverse today than it was 3 years ago. The 2019 table that's at the bottom has in green each racial ethnic group in which we represent the eligible workforce of San Mateo County, and shows in red in our white population that we underrepresent white residents in our workforce. The bottom table is contrasted with the top table that was 2017. So we got slightly more diverse over that time period. We were able to increase the proportion of our Hispanic workforce which is progress, and it gives us more insight than we had 3 years ago. Next slide. We also had many staff tell us other things about working across racial lines, having understanding of how we can make gains on racial equity. And we're learning even more from the countywide employee engagement survey that we got results by race for the first time, late May, haven't quite poured through them, but high on the list. We've been working with the boards and commissions, and some of you are with us today to figure out how can we better support each of those commissions having the diversity that we aspire to alongside our workforce. And we also have a cross-department team, which Louise and Shireen each mentioned, that is carrying out some of this work and supporting this work from colleagues across the divisions. Next, please. As we contend not only with the pandemic and not only with this super necessary call for racial equity, we also have some budget challenges to contend with, and the economic impact that our residents and we are contending with are not insignificant. It's really, really important that we build equity into figuring out what is least harmful, you know, as we think about budget challenges that we need to overcome. We also have been striving to be more explicit in our communication about health equity. And we have a subgroup of executive team colleagues, in addition to Cassius and myself, Lizelle Liria DeLuna and Scott Gilman and Lisa Mancini, that are helping us connect across our divisions and keep learning together. We are fortunate to have leaders at all levels of this organization that helped us pull together a town hall that had several hundred people who are voices of our residents in the COVID challenges that are being disproportionately felt. And also the leadership of the San Mateo Medical Center providers and staff who helped us come together in a solidarity event on June 19th. We have our county leadership that is very inspiring to see around under Board President Warren Slocum's leadership. And we have other arenas in which we can influence the equity platform of those efforts. Next. So what we are looking at, and this forum will also help us ground ourselves in what's most important to each of you and how can we keep learning together. We just think it's so essential to build safety and trust through every supervisory chain in county health and with every partner with whom we partner. We also want to deepen work we've done at the supervisor and manager level so that understanding about racial equity, understanding about our history can go even farther across our organization. And we also have cross-division work groups that I'll show on the next slide that help us in things like our HR practices and our learning opportunities so that we don't lose an opportunity to learn from each other. So the next slide has the work groups that are GARE cross-department effort led by Maria, and the arenas in which we think there's so much ripe opportunity to learn from each other. We hope that this conversation might spark some interest among some of you to join, and look forward to keeping you informed of the next opportunities to come aboard. So as I close, and I think I might have taken a little bit more time than I should have, I was moved by this James Baldwin quote as I was thinking about where we are. We know that the roots are deep and the legacies are challenging. And we know that we have to pace ourselves in this work. But if we don't face what's in front of us, and if we don't take this opportunity to really see how far we can get, you know, we will have lost a chance to do better by our residents, by our clients. And I will say that in addition to what Louise mentioned that leaves her hopeful, your presence, all of you today, makes me hopeful. And I'm the mom of a 16-year-old, a mixed race kid growing up in Palo Alto. He has such clarity about these structural factors and what power and privilege is based on. He's not learning manifest destiny. He's pretty inspired by the young people that have come to protest and demand a better tomorrow for his generation that our generation hasn't delivered yet. So I'm really inspired to work with all of you and to get better at this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarija. I also want to point out for those of you who have joined recently that you can change your name. Many of you are using an alias of Donald Orr. So if you can, you're welcome to go to the top right corner where there's 3 dots, right click. You'll drop down to the 3rd drop down. It says rename. Please rename yourself however you like to be called, and please add, we're asking that everyone add their pronouns, their preferred pronouns. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarija, for that heartfelt presentation, and also for this quote that is so moving. I put it into the chat for everyone. We're gonna go ahead and move to our next speaker, Jay Africa, Director of Behavioral Health and Recovery Services at Marin County Health. And we keep roping him back in for support and help and great thinking. And we're really lucky to have him. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jay.
Well, first I wanted to say thank you for inviting me, and I do miss you all. For most of the folks, I'm looking at the folks on the screen and seeing a lot of familiar faces and familiar names. So thank you. It's really good to be back. I do miss you all, I will say that. So a little bit different from Srija's presentation. Sarija did all the, I think, preliminary setting up of why we need to do this. What I want to actually talk about is just briefly is what Marin is doing in terms of really addressing racial equity. Next slide. So if you don't know, pretty much Marin to some degree is similar and not the same with San Mateo. We are 1/3 of your population. 85% of our residents identify as white. Our median income is $105,000 plus or minus, but our average single family homes cost $1.2 million. 3 cities in Marin that are considered the least racially diverse communities that have at least 80% white folks. That's San Anselmo, Ross, and Belvedere. And because housing is sort of an issue, I just wanted to share with you how much the rent costs, because people really can't afford. Actually, we have 60 plus of our employees that actually travel out of the county every day because they cannot afford to live here. So the average 1-bedroom rent, I would say, is about $2,200, and for a 2-bedroom, it's about $3,400 or $3,360. If you don't know about Marin, there are lots of great things about Marin, but not so many great things. You know, we were ranked, I think, for many, many years by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation as one of the healthiest counties. But very recently, through a few years ago, was also named as one of the top county in California at the highest rate of racial disparities. And if you're probably saying, like, why is Jay there in Marin? I think it's more reason why to really tackle these disparities here in a county that is resourced, but also seeing the disparities day in and day out in all levels. And I'm not saying that you're not seeing that, but and so I'm challenged pretty much every day to think about what do we do in behavioral health to really address and become change agents for folks to change people's stories. Next slide. So just a brief overview and of some of the work that Marin has done about a little bit over a decade. In 2007, the board prioritized 5 efforts addressing equity, looking at economy, shifting the environment to be more environmental friendly, and really looking at education and making it equitable in terms of for folks. Not to say that there has not been any work that has been done in between, but in 2014, 5 departments, library, housing, were asked to pilot some projects specifically on how their departments can address racial equity issues there. So for example, the library, took away fines, library fines that really were a barrier for many folks to go to the library, and then also in the housing, really doing some digging and deepening and digging of really about some of the issues that we were seeing in terms of housing. If you don't know the history of Marin, in that book, The Color of Law, Marin is pretty much sort of highlighted as one of those places that there was really actual racial segregation. Marin City seems to sort of still feel some of those disparities that we're continuing to see in terms of housing. In about 2015, 2016, the county adopted a 5-year business plan that actually called out equity issues of addressing, as a county, addressing equity issues. And then shortly after that, they identified some of the equity measures in terms of workforce, in terms of housing, in terms of education, really set out really clear metrics on what we would look at on a regular basis in terms of measuring the work that has been done. And same at that year, the race counts report came out, which really told us that Marin really was #1 in terms of racial disparities. And that, I think, opened up the eyes even more so for folks to really look at how can we do better in this work. And same as you all, in the participation with the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, we participated, or colleagues participated early on, discussions that had sort of happened in 2016 and continue to be part of that through the GARE work. In 2017, which sort of where I started coming in, if you were not part of GARE, one of the things that they really have you work to do is the adoption of the Racial Equity Action Plan, which really clearly identifies the metrics, benchmarks, who's involved, timeline, that gives sort of a framework where people are going in terms of this work. And I know that you still have that. So I think it's really sort of an important tool. And then shortly after that, our director at that point, Dr. Grant Colfax, started a conversation about how can we in Health and Human Services think about bringing from a high level, more county-wide understanding of what we were doing in terms of health and human services. So we developed our own Health and Human Services strategic plan. One of the things that really I want to talk about that is we identified in that strategic plan our core values. Our core values are of unity, support, trust, and excellence. And if you're not sort of hearing sort of a similarity, some of the lean or leap work that you're doing, that's pretty much sort of aligned. And I know that I was there when you were all talking about that. And then also looked at some of our focus areas. So in our HHS strategic plan, we are focusing on 2 big areas: client experience, or the client, our community, how we involve community, how we engage community, how we make them part of the decision making, conditions, how do we shape the conditions here for Marin residents so that it's livable for them, it's workable for them, thinking about also the effects of climate change. And lastly, which is I think really important, is to think about how do we all look at this from a quality or a quality improvement perspective. So those are the 4 focus areas for our strategic plan. In 2019, and there's a lot of work that happened, the county actually created and hired the first county-wide equity officer, Anya Naya Muse. and really sort of, I would say, created sort of a bigger limelight of why we need to really have conversations and a focused efforts on really reducing racial injustice, for example, in this county. So this position is held at the county level and shared between the CAO and also Health and Human Services. So Anya comes back and forth. And then this year, part of really the recommendation that we've been hearing is that the Board of Supervisors actually provided some initial funding, $1 million for initial funding for race and equity work. And then shortly after the presentations of our budget through our, I would say a couple of weeks ago, they really started thinking about maybe we need to reallocate some existing funds to really enhance our work, that we know that $1 million is not enough. Should we think about really resourcing sort of our work to look at what other parts of our systems can we really make work, coordinate and work together. So there's this conversation that's really happening to reallocate about $1.7 million countywide to really look at enhancing our work. I'm not saying this is enough because it isn't. It doesn't mean that work in the different departments are not happening, but really it was good for us to really see sort of a line item focused on equity work that really gave, I think, sort of a limelight to why even more we should pay attention to this, especially putting some resources to it. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you the race counts. And here in Marin, when you talk about the race counts report, everybody knows. This literally tells you, this report came out a few years ago, really it says that really Marin is #1 in racial disparities. So every Marinite here, every resident in Marin refers to the county whenever they go to talk about issues here. That we often refer to that, and really looking at some of the categories of what we can do in advancing racial equity. So it's a reminder, all the counties are there, so you can actually look where San Mateo is if you would like. Next slide. So now I want to talk a little bit about what's sort of happening right now. So we are very deliberate about our commitment in the county. We are committing to building an anti-racist multicultural organization. I want to emphasize there that we were explicit to be an anti-racist organization, not just a multicultural organization, not just talking about health equity, but an anti-racist organization. We also want to ensure that all our efforts is done through a collective impact approach. We know that this work cannot be done in silos, that we need community partners, we need residents, we need law enforcement, we need libraries, we need county government, we need city officials to be really part of this conversation and putting in center the work of the community. So we are very, very explicit about that work. So specifically, we want to build a culture of equity and belonging here in Marin County, which focuses on 4 things. 1, leadership grounding. It's really very important to sort of have leadership on board and really have the basic foundations of what it means to be a leader within a racial equity lens, what it means to be an anti-racist multicultural organization, that you would have to talk about white supremacy and the ideology of whiteness front and center and not shy away from really hard conversations. We want to also look at how we can change policies, because we know though that as Rija, I think, said, we can do things individually, but if we want to continue the legacy and change the narrative of communities and their stories, we have to build and change the infrastructures that we've created that both inadvertently or covertly still create sort of an atmosphere of racism or inferiority or injustice within our communities. And then this is really one that was called out by our equity officer, that we really need to be strategic about our questioning and to create a culture that questions the decisions, questions why we do certain things the way they are, and really challenge that notion, not in a way to be harmful or be punitive, but more to think about being more creative. Because what we've done in the past has not worked. If we create a culture that we are strategic about our questioning, why we're doing this certain way and what we want to change, we believe that we can change infrastructures and the roads and make really significant pivots that are necessary. Small pivots, big pivots along the way. Next slide. So here are our current goals. And you will actually see a lot of the things in similar to what you're already doing. For this next year, are focusing on training and ensuring that every county employee has taken a cultural intelligence training by the end of 2020. I believe we trained like 1,000 folks already. We have been looking at our investments and ensuring that every budget decision and every program decision is assessed through a lens of equity. Who's it being impacted? Who's it going to alienate, right? What services are going to be impacted more than others? So for example, one of the things that I had done or been doing as part of my mandate as the director is having to do some fiscal reduction. When our team has been proposing some cuts or program adjustments, we answer 5 or 6 questions about that has the lens of equity. And so when we don't feel like it really meets that criteria and it doesn't pass us, we have to reconsider and start to do more strategic questioning about why we are going forward some of the decision making. I'm not gonna say it's easy, but I think it's really a good exercise to really have this lens when we make decisions. And again, I also saw that you are doing lots of work on developing both internal and external communication strategies through the lens of equity or with an equity framework. Every press release, every mission is evaluated using language that really is aligned towards what we are striving for. We are not, again, shying away from really hard concepts and conversations. So it's really important that everybody is trained to know what equity means, what white ideology means, what disparities means, and how different that is from inequity, and why we're focusing on race. In the beginning, it was really a struggle because people wanted to talk about age and gender and class and sexual orientation. And we help really try folks to understand that the commonality of all of those comes down to race. And unless we are talking about race per se and move that forward, we are going to really have a challenge talking about the other issues. So not many people agree with that, but that is sort of the approach that we're doing. It doesn't mean that they're unimportant, but that's really sort of the focus for us in the next few years. And the last one is really looking at our processes and ensuring that many, if not all of our work has meaningful community engagement. Some are obviously easier than others, but one of the mandate for us is really thinking about how do you now involve community members and residents, especially the ones that have not been engaged in the past in your work. And for the folks that are familiar with our Mental Health Services Act, that's part of our community planning process, but we are stepping that up a little bit and ensuring that we are looking at it geographically, racially and ethnically, age-wise, even level of understanding about county services. We assume that most of the people that come to participate, for example, in our work are really aware of what's happening in local government. And we have noticed that they're not. And so we are doing some work to help people prepare them when they come into our work and being part of our town halls, that they are particularly informed about some of the things that we are talking about and not just have them sitting down, for example, and not really fully informed. Next slide. So some current efforts and doing quickly, and again, you'll see a lot of similarities. So we're sort of in the same wavelength. We have a equity team and in Health and Human Services. We have a GARE team that we're continuing to do. We have cultural intelligence and cultural competence training for all employees. We have partnered with the Dominican College in developing a leadership academy, and that is now being reviewed with an equity focus. How do you show up as leaders using the lens of equity as a leader? So it's really shifted from the regular how to become a great supervisor, how to become a leader, but really talking to the Dominican College about how do you look at it from an equity lens. Similar with you are doing, we have affinity groups, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So we have an overarching affinity group in the county called DREAM, Diversity, Respect, Encouragement, Acceptance in Marin. And then we also have specific racial and ethnic affinity groups, which I'll talk about. We have an equity dashboard. I don't know if we'll have time to look at it, but when this is sent out, that talks about that you can actually access that to see where we are in terms of our workforce, how many are managers, in what department, how many is direct line staff, and see a trend over time, public, so that there's accountability for us. And when we're looking at our hiring goals, we can say, here's what you should be working on for the next year. We also created the diversity in hiring toolkit, helping our staff understand implicit bias, hiring with an equity lens, hiring, creating sort of opportunities for people can advertise that's sort of beyond just our traditional advertising fronts. The work of county HR has looked over the years about policies that are that eliminate artificial barriers for recruitment. For example, looking at our minimum qualifications, like do we really need BA in some of the entry jobs that we have? Really looking a lot of our classification and seeing whether we need to look at that a little bit differently and create more opportunities instead of creating more barriers. We have anti-bias trainings for hiring managers and supervisors. And then lastly, through the leadership of our equity officer, we're creating more countywide safe space and brave spaces. Really, it can be tough though with sort of a big group like this when you really are trying to create space for folks to talk about their experiences. Next slide. So I just want to share this, and I was deliberate. We have all these affinity groups. We have our COMEA for African American, SAGA for LGBTQ, MCOE for Latinx, Asian American with MAPLE, and we're folks who identify with disabilities. And the reason why I want to point that out is you have the infrastructure in San Mateo to do that through health equity initiatives. I think that really, we need to create forums like that for similar affinity groups, because they really need the spaces to engage in dialogue, to provide support. What I think is lacking or needs to be a step up is to really create more resources so that there's more time and goals and benchmarks for them to really think about, right? So then every time they can think about, like, what am I doing for this year? How is that aligned with some of the bigger county-wide work that you're all doing? Next slide. So a few things before I end. I wanted to just make sure it is one of the things that I have learned over time is people often think that this is sort of an extra work. And it really isn't. So what we did was to be deliberate that all of the work that we're doing is aligned with both county, state plans. So all of the things, when you get the slide, we'll see all the reports, all the prevention planning, all the county work that we're doing, at least in HHS, so that we can say that every effort that we're doing is connected to our bigger mission and goals. Next slide. So here's just some specific efforts. My boss, Benita McLaren, is really emphasizing that we are being mandated to work with the different divisions, so no longer siloed and really engaging with community. All the division directors, including me, are focused on specific strategic action teams, client experience, using data with an equity lens. In behavioral health, we have our Cultural Competence Advisory Committee. We actually shifted our position from a supervisor to a manager and created a manager for behavioral health equity and inclusion and expanded their oversight. We are using investments in MHSA to really look at equity work. And then one of the things that I really want to share about is really deliberately creating opportunities to build the skills of our leaders. So we have created cultural humility consultations, really strengthening our mid-level managers and upper leadership so that when something happens, they can stop what's happening. If there's a racist comment, what to do? If there's a homophobic comment, what to do, right? How to review reports, grievances from an equity perspective. So that really is an investment that we're doing. We also have provided coaching sessions for folks, especially when there are challenges with really understanding through a lens of equity. Next slide. So my reflection, if I can, I wanted to just sort of end you with some tidbits of the work that I have really been steeped in for the last, I would say, close to 20 years. And my hope is, as I'm finishing this, to think about some of the questions that you're going to ask yourself, you ask your leadership and your colleagues, is to know that all of us have a role to play. And when we think about that, to really understand how change happens, right? Many folks say, well, you only need to do policy and infrastructure. Or many people say, what's really more one-to-one? I think it's all of that. So know and understand what role you can play. And then if in the scheme of things that there are things you can't within your role do, to partner with those individuals and partner with those entities so that you can have sort of a much holistic picture. Also, it tells you that you can't do everything, but that there are colleagues that you can reach out to partner to really make effectful changes. I think we have to lift up equally aligned efforts. I really appreciated the conversation about focusing internally as well. For me, it's really about building the workforce, looking at a lot of soul searching in our organizations, what we can do better. Because even if we are well-intentioned, people get hurt. We say inappropriate things. There's a miscommunication that happens. I think investing in our workforce and in our staff really will make a huge difference. I also want to say, and Shireen will probably be happy that I'll say this, to use stories, but also use data. So in this thing about stories convince, do not forget that the stories really anchor our work. But if we need data to support what we're saying, we need to make that available for everybody. And the reality that this work is really challenging, exhausting, and frustrating. But to a reminder that how can you create spaces where you can show up with all of yourself? Not a self that you think people will agree, not the self that you are ashamed, but all yourself, hurt, angry, hopeful, optimistic, to put that out on the table so that we can talk about it and really create opportunities where people can learn and heal, right? All of ourselves. Oftentimes in my work, I have to put aside other parts of me. And that does not acknowledge our intersectionality. That acknowledges only, I'm the director, but I'm an Asian, I'm an immigrant, I'm a transgender man. All of those comes into play with how I see the world. And it's really important to create spaces where you all can show up in all of you, in all of that package. And then one of the things that I've come to see over the last, I would say 10 so years, is this concept that when we engage in conversations, people often say to me, well, I feel really unsafe. I think we have to really understand how being unsafe means versus discomfort. Most of us, when we have conversations with race and inequality and equity, we're being challenged with our own feelings and thoughts, talk about the discomfort because that's not our lens, that's not our lived experience. But really, but we say, I don't really feel safe talking about it. And when we say we're unsafe, it's really talking about, I have to look deeper into myself and saying like, what is something about what you said that doesn't quite sit well with me that I have to look at deeper? So create spaces that are uncomfortable, but are also so that you can really have that conversation openly. And then the last one, and here's for all you folks, and I believe that everybody in this call is a leader, is that you start with leading with yourself first, right? I know that as a therapist, you can't change, sometimes it's harder to change other people, but you can change your own perspective, you can change your own way of seeing the world. A lot of leadership that starts with self-worth is a lot of self-reflection. And that's actually the work that I'm doing is I'm coaching a lot of folks to really dig deeper about why that doesn't resonate with certain things. So when somebody says, this is not my experience of you, instead of being reactive and defensive, say, wow, I never saw it that way. Let me think about that a little bit deeply. So I want to just sort of end there and say, I hope that it's provoked you a little bit or sort of gave you some insight of some of the work. I want to leave you, I feel kind of jealous that Sharija had a little quote. So one of my quotes that I've actually been thinking about lately is Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is the author of the sort of the history of the United States. And he said, you cannot be neutral in a moving train. At this point in time, there is no neutrality that we can have. Like all of us needs to make changes. All of us needs to say we're going to do something or we're going to or not. So thank you.
No, thank you, Jay. That was beautiful. Really, really lovely. Thank you for bringing your wisdom to this and also bringing the personal directly into the professional and how intertwined they are and how we all have to work on ourselves in different ways. It's not about reading an article about racial equity and having a few skills there. It's really much deeper than that. And it's a calling for all of us to show up in that way. I want to acknowledge that we are way beyond late. So we were hoping for a robust Q&A back and forth. But now what we're going to do is there were 3 questions that came up in the chat already. They seem fairly simple that we could get responses. 2 are for Jay, 1 is for Sarija. And then we're going to ask everyone else to chat in their questions right now. And we will take back the questions to Jay and Sarija and get everyone's questions responded and then return them to everyone. So the questions that have come up so far, one is, could we get a copy of the budget tool that Marin uses? Thank you, Jay. The second for Jay is, could you just say a little bit more about what cultural intelligence training is?
It's really just semantics. It's pretty probably the same that you're doing in terms of foundation of like, what is race, that it's a social construct, and what is, what is the white ideology. So it's pretty much like cultural competence. So it's the same with some of the work that you're all doing.
Thank you. And you should know you're getting a ton of accolades here and lots of people missing you on the chat. Hope you're staying focused on us, but just know the chat is a fan club right now. Sarita, I want to turn to you. There was a question after your presentation around SOGI data not being included yet in some of the COVID response information. I know this is not something that's been raised before. I wonder if you could address this.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that needs advocacy at the state level in that the lab data that gets collected about COVID-19 results typically does not have a field for sexual orientation or gender identity.
Wonderful, thank you. So it is something that it sounds like we're talking with the state about and can continue to push. So thank you to our panelists, Jay and Sarija, for wonderful, wonderful presentations. I know we're all moved by it. We're gonna move now to, well, we're gonna move to Prince. I forgot I had this poll in here. So just because this is a heavy topic, let's take a minute and do a quick poll. Rosa, I hope you can launch this poll. I know you're busy in the background. This poll is on a scale of Prince. How are you feeling right now? 2 is not an option because it was not HR approved. You cannot be feeling number 2 right now. All right, I'm watching the poll come in. Number 6 is really, 6 and 7 are rivaling right now. Those are positive looks. Curious, listening, happy. Those are good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. Let's give a few more minutes, a few more seconds. All right, let's see the results here. Okay, so 6 wins. That is a very happy man right there. And then number 7 is next, which is, I think, looks like listening. Looks like curious. Great. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move from this poll and just acknowledge that this is really difficult work. This is what we're calling our pause moment. Our moment will be shorter than the moment we had initially hoped for. But we want to acknowledge that this work is really hard, that it's personal, that it can be very painful. And most certainly it can be uncomfortable. We need to pause, we need to breathe, and find ways to care for ourselves. And I would just say, take 1 minute right now, whether it's to stretch, whether it's to take a deep breath for yourself, whether it's to stand up, or some people like to journal. Feel free to take a moment to write a few things that are on your mind or any salient points that you learned in the last discussion. Dance, should you choose? And from here, as we take a moment of grounding, we're going to be moving to our breakout sessions. This is sort of where the 2 main features of this entire 2 hours together is really hearing from Srija, Jay, and Luis, and then really hearing from you, which is in the breakouts, which is why we're shortening some of the other pieces so we don't have to shorten this one. We have 20 minutes right now to get into small groups. We're going to really focus on key strengths that we already bring, additional work that needs to be done to support our staff and contractors, boards and commissioners. Anything else you want to share with us about what would make a difference, and how we best move together forward to learn together and improve continuously. So Rosa has been working incredibly hard in the background to make sure that the facilitators that we have 22 facilitators, are going to be placed in the appropriate breakout sessions. And at any minute now, she is going to launch us into breakout sessions. You'll get a prompt, here it goes, and with a breakout room, press join, and when it's complete, the breakout rooms, you'll have a facilitator there. They'll introduce themselves, and then you can come back to this once it's finished. We have 20 minutes. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I think people are coming to join us. We are going to ask that you share salient points from those discussions with in the chat folder on your right side, so we can hear a little bit of, I'm sorry, can you hear me now? I think the host is, I'm getting muted and unmuted.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to ask that you chat into the chat box some of the salient points that you heard from the conversation in your small groups. And we have the notes from the small groups to take back with us. So we're looking forward to looking through those. And then what we're going to do, just given, again, our time constraints, is that we're going to go ahead and move towards our closing. We have Maria, who's going to be presenting, and someone to help us think through and work through a wellness activity. Maria Lorente Foresti is the Director of Office of Diversity and Equity and BHRS. Maria, I'm glad you joined us. Thank you.
Hi, no, thank you. You know, I wanted to close by sincerely thanking each of you for participating in the forum today, and thanking everyone who led the presentations and all the background work to make today happen. We do know how busy everyone is and really appreciate the time that you took to be with us today. You know, as the lead for our GARE cross-divisional team over the last year and a half, it's been really amazing to see how far we've come on our journey together to advance racial equity. Jay was our first lead, and now he is here presenting and sharing his wisdom from Marin County, where he's also leading great work. And as Louise mentioned at the start of our time today, our personal and collective journey cross many paths, and that we grow together. Individually, we can manifest incredible change in how we do our work, impart great wisdom, and improve equity. If each of us did a little bit, collectively, we've done a lot. You know, we do recognize that this is a big lift and we do need each other. So we encourage everyone to please stay engaged and to continue to share your wisdom and to continue to be on this journey with us, with the collective us. I also want to invite everyone to our second community town hall input session. It will be on August 7th from 11 to 1. And we're going to hear from our communities about COVID-19 and the related impacts on our communities of color, our LGBTQ plus communities, and our low income communities, to hear their voice and understand better about how we can respond and support their needs at this time. And after today's group, we will be sending out that flyer. So thank you again to everyone for all of us being here together today. And, you know, we're just wishing you have a really nice rest of the afternoon.
We have one more poll that we would love for you to join us in taking in the last minute. Please launch the poll. Thank you. The questions are, what is your level of awareness? That's the same question that you received. What's your level of interest and engagement? And then you have a new question around how important do you think it is for county health to have a focus on racial equity? I see people filling in one. Okay, number 2 is starting to come in. Couple people on number 3. And number 3 has 99% already as very important, that it's very important for us. Okay, let me give it, I see information still coming in, so let's give it one more moment. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll now and share the results with you. You can see that the level of awareness, that there's some knowledge clearly winning out, and that's 67%. And in fact, it looks much higher than we had before in the opening poll, which had more in the very little. Then for the level of interest and engagement, we have some interest. We have a lot of interest and engagement coming in, much higher than before. Thank you. Okay, please ignore this. And I not know how to take that off. I will learn. How important do you think it is for county health to focus on racial equity? And clearly it's very important. 99% felt it was important. So wonderful. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you for taking the time to share with us your thoughts and emotions and feelings in the small groups. And just remember, I promised you it would be imperfect, so I delivered on that. And we look forward to sending you the recording, sending you the chat, answers to your chat, distributing a survey with what we learned from the small group conversations so that everyone can add to it and prioritize. And then we'll run that through our GARE team, the health executive team, and identify where we want to go next from here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A huge thank you to those in the background, the hosts, the guests, all the speakers. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.